Welcome to It's Who You Know, the podcast, bridging the gap between Jewish leaders and those who follow them. Gain insight from Jewish professionals who make the decisions that influence your Jewish world.
Welcome to It's Who You Know, the podcast. This is your host, Michelle W. Malkin. My guest today is Rabbi David Rosenn, who is the president and CEO of Hebrew Free Loan Society. And I met David at the Alumni Forum for Leading Edge's, I guess, all of their programs, not just the Leading Executives one, but you were in an early cohort. And so I had the pleasure to sit with you and some of your colleagues. And it was so wonderful to meet you and hear about your work. And I'm a personal beneficiary of a loan from Los Angeles, and just really wanted to not only hear about your experience, because you've led a number of different organizations, but also to kind of spread your word for you and to make sure people are aware of the services that you and your colleagues. There are 50, I think I read, different free loan societies out there, really making a huge difference in people's lives. So welcome to the program, David.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here.
Awesome. So we'll start, as we always do, with your personal story and how you got into leadership and how you specifically found yourself in this role.
It's hard to know where to start on that, but I will say that I never thought of myself as working in the Jewish community. I certainly never thought of myself as aiming for the rabbinate. And what I really wanted to do was work on social change issues. That was a passion from early on. And I did spend some time after college working in various social change organizations, maybe partly because I majored in philosophy and it was pretty clear I wasn't going to be a philosopher. So I needed to figure out what kind of work should I do. And I had a plan of working for 3 years, checking out different kinds of jobs, and then going back to graduate school and training myself for whatever it seemed like I wanted to do. And I spent my first year after college working at Shatil, which is the capacity building arm of the New Israel Fund. Shatil works with dozens of Israeli nonprofit social change organizations, citizens groups, advocacy groups, trying to make Israel the best society that can possibly be, and teaching them, how do you do this? How do you fundraise? What's a board? How do you create a strategic plan? And I had a great year working in Israel. I learned a lot about the country. I learned a lot about nonprofit organizations. And I did, however, wind up coming back to the United States. And I moved to Washington, and I got a job working at a Hispanic civil rights organization. To me, it seemed pretty obvious that this was a population that really need a lot of attention if you wanted to get some good things done on social issues facing Americans. Working on issues facing Hispanic Americans was a great place to put your effort. Mm-hmm. Although almost everyone working at the organization was themselves Hispanic. I'm not Hispanic. I did grow up in Miami, but that doesn't make me Hispanic. And I was asked often, kind of, why are you working here? Why aren't you working for your people?
Oh.
and no, it was a fair question at an ethnically based organization, and it made me reflect on that. And I think one of the things that emerged for me was, well, I'm not working for my people specifically. That is, I'm not working in a Jewish organization that serves Jews primarily. But I do really feel like working on these issues of housing and poverty and education. These are deeply Jewish values. Mm-hmm. To help people connect to those kinds of things, to make sure that people don't live lives where the image of God in which they are created is obscured, not only for other people, but also for themselves. Like that all felt very Jewish to me.
Right.
But I got the question, and then it made me wonder, okay, so what is the Jewish community doing on these sorts of issues? And so the following year, I took a job at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, which, as you may know, is the largest DC-based organization that represents one of the American Jewish denominations. And I was working as a legislative assistant. I learned, what does it mean for a synagogue movement to try to have a voice on national policy issues? How does it work that the movement brings back information about those issues, and what's at stake in terms of values for the community to all of its congregations? And all that was great. And I was learning a lot again. One day, I was sent to a church with a confirmation class to learn about what this church had done in terms of social action activities. And I could not help myself but ask my supervisor, like, okay, why are we going to a church when, I mean, there must be some synagogue that has done some good
Right.
social action stuff. And basically, I was just told, like, just go and you'll see. And I did. I went, and the church was amazing. It was a Lutheran church that had a Lutheran type membership, which is to say almost all white people.
Mm.
And after the riots following Martin Luther King's assassination, when lots of the white residents of Washington, D.C. moved out of the district, a lot of their members just moved out to the suburbs, and then they would come back in to this sort of like burned out neighborhood to worship in their 100-year-old plus church. And they started getting agitated by the members of the community to do something about it. And so, to make a very long, inspiring story short, they ultimately decided to buy the property in the two city blocks next to the church and convert some of it into permanent affordable housing, and to put up temporary housing for women who are getting over drug addiction, and to put a free medical clinic there. And it was the most amazing kind of thing that you had ever seen a congregation do. And I understood why the Religious Action Center would want to send people over to see, like, this is what a congregation can do if it sets its mind to it. And while the pastor was talking about all the things that they were doing, they said, in the free medical clinic, some people work there who are members of the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, which is an organization that gives young people who just graduated college a chance to work for a year on poverty issues. And then they all live in intentional community, and they think about what their spiritual life has to do with their work on the social issues. And I thought, oh, wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I wish I could do that. There's got to be a Jewish one of these, because we're so great at building organizations. I mean, I'm sure we have one of these.
Right.
Kind of ran back to the Religious Action Center and said, like, okay, what's the Jewish Lutheran Volunteer Corps? And they said, well, there isn't one. You can, if you want to spend a year working on poverty issues, the Joint can send you to former Soviet Union or India, or you could do Otzma in Israel, but there's really nothing in the United States to work on these issues that's a year-long Jewish framework. And I thought, that's a mistake. And there ought to be ways for people to be serious about their Jewish commitments and be serious about their social change commitments, and have those two things reinforce each other. And surprising no one more than me, perhaps, the conclusion that I came to at the end of all this was, the kind of graduate school that I should go to is not law school, and it's not getting a master's in public administration. I should go to rabbinical school. And I should try to work within the Jewish community to inspire these kinds of integrations. And so I applied to the Jewish Theological Seminary, the Conservative Movement's rabbinical school. And I was accepted to that. And the summer before I went to New York to start the program, I said to the folks at the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, can I come work for you for the summer? I have some savings. You don't have to really pay me, but I'm going to Xerox all your documents. And one day,
right, I'm going to copy.
I'm going to start this program in the Jewish community. And they were like, fantastic. We stole this from the Jesuits. And you can do the same thing. And so I've had a lot of ideas in my life, Michelle, and most of them do not come to fruition.
Definitely not the way that one did.
This actually did. I spent 5 years in rabbinical school, and at the end of it, I started something called Avodah, the Jewish Service Corps, which was modeled very heavily on the Lutheran Volunteer Corps. And we began with 9 college graduates who spent a year living together in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And working at various anti-poverty organizations in New York, and then they would spend 2 nights a week learning from activists about different kinds of social change, also studying Jewish history and Jewish teachings about what all of this means in Jewish terms. And I spent 13 fantastic years at Avodah. We grew from New York to Washington to Chicago to New Orleans. And it really was an ideal opportunity to give people a chance to create at a time of their lives when they're really thinking hard about who they want to be and what they want to do, to solidify commitments that they have both to Jewish life, but also to civic engagement and social change, and to have that all be connected. That was exactly the kind of thing that I was aiming for and hoping for. So very quickly, just I'll speed up to how I got to the Hebrew Free Loan Society. After 13 years at Avodah, I thought, if I don't leave here, I'm gonna wind up staying here for my entire career.
Yes.
And as much as I love the organization, I didn't really want to have one job for my entire career. And it's also not that great for organizations to have the founders stick around for 30 years.
Yeah, we're about to hear all about that in my in my next interview. Yep.
So I decided that I would tell the board that I was going to be looking for another job, and we should get ready for that process. And it was in 2008, and so it was turned out not to be a great year to be leaving your nonprofit organization during the middle of a financial crisis. So I stuck around for another year, and we weathered the financial crisis extremely well. And it convinced me that the organization was ready for me to leave, and it would be okay. And I found a job working at the New Israel Fund, again, the place where I had worked the year after I graduated college. And this time I wasn't working in Israel, I was working in the United States, running the US staff. And that was a terrific experience for about 6 years, at which point a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, do you know that the executive director at the Hebrew Free Loan Society is retiring after 20 years? This spot is opening up, and I think it would be really something it's got your name written all over it."
Yeah, nice.
I really didn't really know that much about the Hebrew Free Loan Society, but I took a look and just fell in love with the mission and the organization, and felt like this has a lot of opportunity for growth. So I love an opportunity to take something which is really fundamentally working and wonderful and expand it. And that's what I've been working on the last 10 years at Hebrew Free Loan.
That's so great. I have so many questions. Thank you so much for diving so far back in your history, because that's really, that's our audience, and people are hearing want to, know your path, how you got there, so thank you so much for sharing all of that. I want to start by asking you about the decision to go to rabbinic school. And I think it's I don't want to call it an issue, but a topic of conversation often in sort of our profession about rabbi versus not rabbi, the kind of respect you get or don't get. And for me, you're like a rabbi, not an MPA. And so for me, I was like, MPA, not a rabbi, right? So for me, it was very much like, I want to know the management. I want that MPA degree. I want to have those basics. That also seemed like you got a lot of that prior to going to rabbinic school as well, in terms of your experiences, getting some basics about nonprofit management, that kind of stuff. So it's a twofold question. First is before you went to rabbinic school, what were you hoping it would give you that would be different than a management program? And then on the flip side of that, how do you think that's influenced your career, your ability to create growth, how people see you, all that good stuff?
Well, one of my conclusions from working 3 years after college was that social change happens basically in two ways. One is there is a technical solution to some problem, right? So affordable housing, you have to put together so many different technical solutions. There's architecture, there's public finance, there are all these things. If you don't have people who really know what they're doing on those things, you're not going to get good outcomes. So one way to accomplish social change would be to be an issue expert and to really figure out what is the key to good public education, or how do you create successful affordable housing developments.
Right.
I also realized that you could have all of these fantastic solutions ready to go, but if there isn't a society that cares that people should get a decent education or that they should have a decent place to live, no one's going to take those plans and implement them. There isn't going to be the political will to do the hard work of social change. And so it made me wonder, how do you create a society where people give a damn? What goes into that?
Right.
And that's where I really felt like, okay, I feel like the kind of inspiration that I get from my Jewish life, from my Jewish community, from Jewish teachings, from Jewish history, all of that has combined to make me a person who cares about this kind of stuff. I'm sure that's true for lots of other faith communities also, and other kinds of communities, but the Jewish community has something special here. And I want to be on the team that continues to shape us as a culture that really feels responsible for each other and for the wider families that we are members of. So that's what led me to rabbinical school as opposed to, say, law school. I also have to say I really love learning and teaching Torah,
There you go.
and feel like being a rabbi gives you an opportunity to do that more often than maybe other professions
Right.
would. So it felt like the right choice for me. It was a little confusing, I think, to the admissions committee at JTS when I said, I really don't want to
love
be
you,
a
Rabbi.
congregational rabbi. I really don't want to be a teacher in a school. This is what I want to do. I want to do social change work. As it turns out, I was actually at the beginning of a pretty big wave of people who would come to rabbinical school with this sort of thing in mind. And I can name a dozen colleagues now
Oh, interesting.
who are rabbis who went to rabbinical school to work on social change issues. And I think that it is not confusing to any admissions committee when they hear somebody say that now, which is a nice
Right.
change.
Right. That's very interesting. And so how do you think that's influenced your ability to make change? Like you were saying, you kind of bring it into maybe some of the programs or conversations you're having or speaking. There's an interview you did with Jewish Broadcasting Service. There was a lot of Torah and Judaism in that conversation. How has that kind of shown up for you as a leader over these years?
There's two ways to think about that. One is there something extra that I get because I have the title rabbi that I wouldn't get if I didn't have that title? Do I have access or entree or recognition? And I think the answer is yes in some circles and no in others. Certainly extremely helpful if you're trying to exercise leadership in the Jewish community to have the title rabbi. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it is a door opener, and there is a certain level of respect that is afforded to people with the title. And I hope we do our best to earn that respect and to deserve that respect. I think the other aspect of this is people often ask me, okay, you basically are a nonprofit executive.
Right.
You know, are you do you regret having gone to rabbinical school? Like
Oh,
this kind
no.
of wasted. And I feel absolutely that is not correct.
Right.
First of all, nonprofit organizations, like any organizations, send messages out into the world just by existing.
Right.
The fact that the Jewish community insists that there be a resource for people who have financial struggles and want financial opportunity, and that resource should be community supported and not dependent upon the profit making on the very people who you're trying to help out, that's already a value statement that you can enhance and shape by the ways in which the organization goes about doing its work, by the kinds of communication that it has out to the community. And so I feel like, you know, we teach by example, but not only by example. I also try to make explicit why interest-free lending is a distinctively Jewish model. It's not exclusively Jewish, but it's something we've been doing for a really long time. And I try to share with people as much as I can, including on that interview that you watched, you know, why is it that we want to do this thing that nobody else does with money? I mean, money in our society is for making other money. That's what it's
Right.
for. And that's not the philosophy of the Hebrew Free Loan Society. Our philosophy is that some money should be for a public purpose, and it should be for helping people, for doing mitzvahs with. And so I feel very rabbinic when I'm running this particular organization, but also running organizations. I mean, it's full of organizations are just people
Right.
doing things. And guess what? People interact with other people, and sometimes they do it well, and sometimes they don't do it well. And it's not a bad thing to have pastoral training when you're trying to be a
Mhm.
good manager. So I try
Absolutely.
very hard to make sure that our organization understands what its values are, lives out its values, and I have opportunities every single day to exercise my
Yeah.
rabbinic training, not just in terms of teaching Torah, but also in terms of, shaping policies that ensure that our employees and our donors and our borrowers are all treated with dignity and respect. Feels to me very rabbinic kind of thing to do.
Absolutely. And I think oftentimes there's kind of that question, and I'm sure I've brought it up in these conversations before, but like what makes that organization Jewish, right? And especially the ones like Hebrew Free Loan, but even like social services, like that don't necessarily just cater to a population of Jews. It's a question of like, well, what is it that's Jewish? When your name doesn't have any Hebrew in it, what are those values? And so what your background seems to allow you and afford you is kind of the automatic response to that and saying these are the reasons why. And I think the reason why I went to Hebrew Union College because it was like, let me make sure I'm going to be working in the Jewish community, an undertone of, really strong Jewish understanding and education that I can draw on when I'm meeting with my staff, when I'm meeting with donors, when we're communicating about the organization, that it's not something that's hard to work into the way that you talk about your work, that it's kind of a natural thing. And so it's really great that you have all of that training, behind you to really make that point that you do so well. So let's get into the organization. You are based out of New York. That's specifically where your work happens. And as I mentioned, this work is, all over the country. But tell me a little bit more about the organization.
Sure. We were started in 1892
Mm,
by immigrants on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. These are people who, basically made it one or two rungs up the economic ladder, and turned around and saw many, many other people like them coming
mhm,
into the city and asked themselves, what can we do to be helpful? And decided to take a model from the old country of the Gemach, the interest-free loan fund,
mm,
and they pooled, I think, less than $100 in the initial meeting, and they started making $5 loans to people who were selling stuff off of push carts, and it grew from there. Uh, this year we'll do somewhere around $32 million worth of lending to probably over 2,000 borrowers. That'll be 4,500 loans in our portfolio. We make loans for small business, we make loans for college, we make loans for people who just experienced a financial bump and they don't have enough savings to cover it, so they don't want to put the expense on their high interest credit card and wind
mm,
up in an even worse spot. We have loans for people who are trying to bring a kid into their life and they don't have enough money
right.
for if they need medical intervention for that, or the adoption is an expensive process also. Basically, if there's a thing that costs money that people of modest means don't have,
Right.
we can provide that money. And we do it at 0% interest with zero fees. So when people borrow from us, they only pay back to us what they borrowed. There's no extra charge for it. And they do it in monthly installments at a rate that they can afford. The surprising thing is that we have a 99% repayment rate, and our target is people who are financially in not the best shape by
Right.
design. And the reason that we have such a high repayment rate is because, yeah, as opposed to most lenders who will do some kind of credit scoring to try to figure out, is this person a good risk to lend to, or maybe they'll ask for collateral. Our folks don't really have collateral.
Right.
What we do is we ask everybody to bring a guarantor.
Hmm.
Guarantor is somebody in your life who promises to pay off the loan if you don't pay it off. And the fact is that most people bring their relatives or their neighbors or their coworkers, and the guarantor serves as an accountability mechanism. This person is someone who you know who is going to have to pay off your debt if you don't pay it.
Right.
So our borrowers are very highly motivated to pay off their debt, and it converts a kind of social capital, which a lot of people who don't have a lot of financial capital do have. They have relationships. They have
Right.
people who trust them and believe in them. Converts that into financial access to financial capital. And we almost never get paid back by guarantors. We almost always get paid back by the borrower. And this is a model that my brilliant predecessors came up with.
Mm.
And it's the model that most of or I think all of the Hebrew free loans across the country use. We all have these insanely high repayment rates, and it allows an incredibly efficient recycling of the money that we have back out into the community. When
Right.
people repay our loans, we just use that money to make new loans. And it also is philanthropically high impact because, if you gave us $100,000 in loan capital, we'd lend it out. And then, 2 years later, we'd lend it out again. And then 2 years later, we'll lend it out again. And there's almost
Right.
no stopping that. So that's who we are and what we do.
Yeah, that's so great. I think, especially in today's climate, that's a little dicey for Jews. It's a little unpredictable. I mean, this cliche of Jews being, money hungry, or to have the sense that like it's not only were you not necessarily that way, but here we have all these institutions that actually give out money for free to bring back, and not at these kind of high interest rates, and the values around lending money, dealing with money, and helping people, right? This sense that it's you could just give away money like a lot of social services might do, or things, right? You're saying let's help you from one thing to another, and your life will be better for it, and you will not be further into debt for having to take on a new business or education or getting through some kind of crisis. So I'm always very focused on just putting more good in the world. And when you talk about putting more good in sort of the light of Jews, this is certainly something in an area that is often used against the Jewish people as the way that we perceive money. That's really great. So how has you've been here for about 10 years. Your friend thought you'd be a perfect match, which seems like, been there for 10 years, so it seems like it was. Can you tell us a little more about, what it was like to come into the position? Where was the organization? How have things changed over the 10-year? Have you been able to accomplish what you were hoping to in terms of growth, or, have there been roadblocks in trying to increase access for this program?
Sure. When I started at the Hebrew Free Loan Society, we were lending at around the $8.5 million a year
Mm.
level. So $8.5 million is not nothing. It's really nice to be able to do, but the need across the 8 county area that we serve New York City, the 2 counties on Long Island, and Westchester County. I mean, the need is just so much greater than that.
Hmm.
And so from the very beginning, my question was, how can we grow at a sustainable pace, but as fast as we possibly can? Because we got a thing that really works very well,
Right.
and we just need to do more of it. So we've gotten it from 8.5 million to like 32 million, and that's great. That's a big increase. But at the beginning of my work at HFLS, I thought, okay, there has got to be some sort of structural limit to how much we can grow this. I mean, if it's all dependent upon philanthropy, then I don't know what the size is, but like I should grow this from 8.5 to whatever it is, $40 million, and then it's going to plateau and we're going to hit our cap, and then I'll move on to something else. And what I discovered was, no, that's not actually true,
Right.
because it's not that expensive to run the organization. That costs us $4 billion a year to run the organization. But out of that, we make, $32 million worth of loans. And when I add on a few $1 million of lending every year, it's just a sort of incremental increase in our operating budget. So
Right.
if I can successfully raise what it takes to run the place, my biggest question is, where is all the lending money going to come from? Because if I want to grow from, like $32 million to $50 million a year, I have to come up with, $18 million.
Right, right.
So where is that coming from? And the answer is, there is a lot of money in New York City. And there are a lot of people who, first of all, really value what we're doing and are willing to give us gifts in order to grow the lending.
Mm-hmm.
But we also, I know it sounds a little funny, but we borrow money in order to lend it. And we often borrow it at 0% so that when we lend it 0%, it doesn't wind up costing us. And the trick is,
From donors, or from where do you lend that money from?
we borrow money from a few sources,
Mm.
sometimes individuals who are able to lend us significant amounts of money at 0% from their own assets, sometimes from our foundation partners, right? So foundations are endowed, they have a pool of assets. It is usually diversified, and some of those assets are held in cash.
Right.
So if we say, look, that part of your portfolio that is de-risking the rest of it and is held in cash and cash equivalents, why don't you park it with us? And we will actually guarantee that you get the money back, but in the meantime, we'll use it to do some good in the community. And so we offer foundations an opportunity to have even more impact without any amount of grant money extra being spent by them. We're using the other side of their balance sheet. So we've successfully had a lot of loans or recoverable grants or project-related investments. They go by a lot of names, but basically foundations are letting us use their money for a while.
Now, is that something that they've been doing for a long time? Is this something you brought to the table? How did you kind of come up with that innovation?
Well, we didn't invent this.
Yeah.
There have been project-related investments for a while, but it's becoming a little bit more widespread, especially when foundations have an opportunity to do what they call impact investing, where there's not only a social return, but there's also a financial return. We can't provide a financial return because it's just too expensive for us to do that. But we still provide a pretty good social return. And for foundations that are used to lending for social impact, it's something that we are a good candidate for. And sometimes we do introduce foundations to this, and they do it for the first time through the Hebrew Free Loan Society. And I think that's a great way of opening up this channel for other nonprofits that can take advantage of it. And one other thing that we did, which was innovative on our part, was we went to the largest donor advised fund in the Jewish community in New York City, called the Jewish Communal Fund. And we said, look, when people put money into the Jewish Communal Fund, you give them choices of how to invest it. They can put it in a stock fund or a bond fund, or they can put it in a money market account. Could you just add one more choice, which is a social impact loan fund? And that money would go not in the form of a grant, but it would come as a kind of investment. They would be investing in the social impact that we would make, and they would lend out this money. And we've had almost $8 million of fund holder money come to us through the Jewish Communal Fund. We've been able to make more than $8 million because we recycle the loans. And that's a way to unlock some of the potential, the philanthropic potential of money that's in donor advised funds. It's been a great relationship for us. So we try to be creative in ways that we raise capital. One more thing that I'll say is, sometimes I have asked a donor, would you give me $1 million for this loan fund? And they say, no, not going to give you $1 million.
You gotta ask.
I said, okay, well, would you lend us $1 million for a couple of years?
Right.
And they say, no, not doing that either. I said, okay, I have one last ask. Would you cover the cost of what it costs us to borrow $1 million? And let's say that we could get $1 million at 4%. So it's $40,000. Would you cover the cost of that and make it effectively zero for us? And out of a $40,000 grant, you get $1 million worth of loan impact. And some people have said, sure, that sounds really good. And so we've unlocked some capital in that way as well.
That's awesome. I mean, you are definitely in the right place to be in. I mean, that's just what an interesting model in terms of I've thought a lot about like the social entrepreneurship model. I did an internship with National Council of Jewish Women in Los Angeles, and they have their thrift stores, and that makes them their $8 million, at least when I was there a long time ago, their development budget was 30,000. And I was like, oh my goodness, could you imagine, a nonprofit without a development fund, right? But that really is, when you start with 8.5 and you have the model that you have for the service that you're providing that recycles, growing it and growing it and growing it. It's not like you're also then running an $8 million organization where you have to raise those funds every year for the services you're providing. That's a really amazingly sustainable model, I think, for you and for the other organizations that do similar work. So that's so great to kind of have a little bit more of that freedom that you're not kind of just trying to keep your annual fund running, that you can kind of be a little more innovative with the way that you grow your programs. That's very cool.
For sure. It's not really a revenue maker for us. Like we still have to raise our operating budget.
Right.
But there it's sort of magic when you realize that I'm working really hard for $100,000 grant on my operating budget, and I'm over here having a conversation with somebody lending us $2 million
Right.
because they really want us to lend out this money and they see the
Yeah.
need for it. So it's good that we're able to operate both of those campaigns simultaneously. I do want to go back to just one thing,
Yeah.
which was implicit in a comment that you made about the Jewish community being seen in a positive light because of the
Mm,
lending we do. So there is a split among the Hebrew Free Loans across the country. Some of them lend just in the Jewish community, and some
right.
of them lend in the Jewish community and also beyond the Jewish community. So since 1892, when we were started, the Hebrew Free Loan Society in New York City has been a both-and organization.
Right.
And we have a lot of borrowers who are outside the Jewish community. And I got to tell you, it is, it's a really fun experience
Mm,
to go to some community and say, "Hi, I'm Rabbi David Rosenn. I'm from the Hebrew Free Loan Society, and we'd like to lend you money at 0% interest."
right.
And totally like blow up people's
Yeah.
perceptions of what's going on in the Jewish community. And on a more serious note, wind up over time building really deep relationships with these communities
Mm,
where the relationship is based on something that's really important to both communities. And it's
right.
not just a conversation about common interests, it's an action around common interests. And I think that work really does have positive dividends for us at a time when we can use all the positive community relations dividends that we can get.
Yeah, indeed. I've been thinking a lot about, the various efforts that are, stopping anti-Semitism and, how can we fight this and all these kind of combative words around people who hate Jewish people. And I'm like, it's just not gonna happen. And that's just my predisposition to just put more good in. There's no ending people in the world who hate Jews for whatever their reason. Unless that's the world to come, may we all be so blessed to enjoy that. But I prefer to spend my time in the building of good in those interactions. And you talk in your other interview about the power dynamics, right? It's not that you're coming in and saying, we're Jews and we're going to come give you free stuff, or we're going to come and, have this imbalance of power. It's saying we're going to help you, and you're now kind of to empower you, and the power is the same because you're going to do it for yourself and you're going to repay us, and we're now in a relationship that doesn't feel like we have made you feel lesser than in any of those ways. And so yeah, so being able to do that kind of work within the non-Jewish community of, I mean, I think about that every day on a micro level. I wear a, Magen David, and I go to the grocery store and I have an interaction with the clerk. And if, I'm not a kind person and I don't have my values in the forefront, I'm not just representing myself, but I'm representing a people, and I take that seriously. And you get to do that on such a grand scale, which is so lovely.
It is really, I wake up in the morning and I think, wow, I get to go to work today.
No,
It
that's
is,
so great. May we all be so blessed.
yeah, it's pretty fantastic. It's also very short-term gratification because when people take our loans, I mean, they are paying right then to get job skill training that will, in 8 months, enable them to increase their earning power for the rest of their life. Or they're able to move into affordable housing, or they're able to get their kid the kind of education that they need. It's so many different ways of ensuring that people have the things that they need for a decent and dignified life, and being able to work in an organization where that's just happening all the time. It's not like we don't have any worries or troubles at my organization. We
Right.
do, just like everybody, but it's counterbalanced by a tremendous amount of just immediate observable impact on the community.
Yeah. I mean, even just being able to make, like you mentioned, some people's dreams come true. My husband's looking at opening a board game lounge, and he's like, well, how do I figure this out? How do I fund it? And almost immediately he's like, okay, well, how much can we get from, as an interest-free loan, as opposed to the other kinds of business loans he's going to have to get that are, going to take him that much longer because it's that much more expensive. That's even an option to say, you've got a dream about opening a business, like let's partner with you to make that happen, which is so great. So you have a unique position. You have your sort of world in New York City, and you're connected to all these other worlds across the country. Do you have any kind of thoughts on just the broader Jewish community, how it's evolved, where it's going? Any thoughts on a bigger picture of the world you inhabit?
Um, oh, I will say that I'm married to a wonderful person who is also a rabbi, who
Mhm.
also runs a social change organization. Her name is Rabbi Jenny Rosenn. She runs Dayenu, Jewish Call for Climate Action. And both of us got into the rabbinate partly because we wanted Jewish life to be full of positive messages,
Mm.
right? Not like be Jewish so Hitler doesn't win or something
Right.
like this, right? Or don't be defensively Jewish.
Right.
Let's figure out why it's fantastic to be Jewish. And
Hmm.
so we set about, building organizations that people would be really proud of and energized by and passionate about. So I feel like since October 7th, like a lot has changed just in
Mm.
terms of how much we can really focus exclusively on the upside of all of this.
Right.
One of the loan programs that we do, one of the few loan programs that we do to organizations as opposed to individuals, is we have a loan for organizations that have received a grant from the Department of Homeland Security to beef up their physical security infrastructure, like to put in video cameras or steel reinforced doors or things like that. And like a lot of government grants, you need to do the work and then submit the receipts, and then they reimburse you. But if you don't have the money up front to do the work,
Mm.
you can't really take advantage of the grant. And
Right.
so we thought, well, a lot of smaller organizations are going to have problems with that. Let's just solve that for them. And so we lend them the money. They do the project. When they get paid back by the Department of Homeland Security, they repay our loan.
That's amazing.
It's a great program. I also hate this program. Like, why do we need a program like this? It's really,
Right.
really disheartening that
Yeah.
so many places in the Jewish community need to protect themselves, more and
Or
more.
don't
And
have the building fund or capital to shell out $100,000 for those repairs. Right.
yeah, I mean, I really think that as a community, we are now, out of necessity, taking much, much more seriously
Mm.
what it means to defend ourselves
Right.
in the world. And I'm not going to give up on trying to create positive structures for Jewish life. But I
Hmm.
also think you asked me, do I have any thoughts on the broader Jewish community?
Absolutely.
I think that we are reorienting to a more defensive posture,
Mm.
and I think that that's the right thing to do. And I'm doing things for my organization to try to help with that. But I hope we don't, go too far over to the other end, and I hope we maintain our ability to be positive, to find reasons to celebrate Jewish life, and to also look outside the borders of our own community and continue to create relationships that aren't just based on sort of mutual defense, but also somehow have a vision for a world in which things are better between people. And it's hard to do that when you are scared, and it's hard to do that when you need to protect your family. But I'm pretty committed to that, and I want to work with other people leading in the Jewish community to try to preserve that element of who we are and what we do.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So last thing I really like to ask, because I don't have any comments on that, that was just beautiful. And, people who are listening, who are working in Jewish organizations, maybe some of your employees as well. Any advice that you have? I mean, you've spent so long running organizations, growing them, being innovative, thinking about different ways to make an impact. Any advice other than go to rabbinic school if that's if that's your path, but any advice for people in the field in the community?
Uh, One piece of advice that I have is that it makes a lot of sense to hold yourself accountable to measurable outcomes.
Mm,
Like, this is a basic tool of management.
right.
And it's also the case that most of the important things in the world cannot be measured.
Mm,
So if you only hold yourself accountable to measurable things, then you probably will be missing some very, very important parts of the puzzle. I would also say that organizations have a primary responsibility to carry out their mission in the world,
mhm,
but we should not forget that no organization is going to solve any problem all by itself, that we all exist in fields. Like, I work in the Jewish nonprofit organization field. I work in the financial inclusion field. I work in the Hebrew Free Loans of the World field.
right.
All of these have the power to do things collectively that none of us could accomplish by ourselves. So I'll give you an example. Right after October 7th, we were pulling out our hair trying to figure out, like, is there something that we can do? Is ridiculous.
Mhm,
We're all the way over here. Like, what could we possibly do that would be helpful? And then
right.
it occurred to me, like, wait a minute, there is a free loan organization in Israel called Ogan. We have a relationship with them. Let me call them. Let me check in on
Yeah.
them, see how they're doing, and see what they need. And they appreciated the check-in call, and they also said, we think there's going to be an enormous amount of economic impact here. We are gearing up to raise $100 million.
Wow.
And I said, well, I don't have $100 million, but let me go back and see what I can do. And I went back to our board and I said, we have emergency money that we are holding on the side. We've never used it. Doesn't mean that we won't at some point need it, but can we take some of it? Can we take $1 million and send it over to Israel? Oh, and by the way, we're not the only Hebrew Free Loan in the United States.
Mhm,
There's about to be a conference of all of us. Let me go and take this and suggest that we together make a collective loan to Ogan and see what we can do. And we wound up pulling together $3.5 million. We sent it to them, I think, in December, so pretty
mhm.
quickly. It was
Yeah.
before a lot of the other philanthropic money got there. And we never could have pulled this off if we hadn't been working in the network.
Yeah.
And so I know that sometimes it can seem like a distraction, or, you've got your own issues to work on. So why are you going to join the network or the association or the whatever, or even,
Mhm,
collaborate with the guys down the street? But I really think that this is what society is, right? Society is not every
right.
individual. I mean, I know some people do believe that society is every individual working for their own self-interest, and then it all works out
Yeah.
somehow magically. I don't
Not the
actually
Jewish
think
community though, hopefully.
that is correct. And I think that we ought to, spend some amount of our time as leaders figuring out who can we work with beyond our own institutional projects. What could we do together?
Right. I love that. Well, thank you so much, David. This has been such a great conversation. I'm so happy to hear more about the ins and outs of your work. I knew what you did, but hearing more about how it all happens in your own career and getting into this kind of position and the impact that you made is just amazing. So thank you so much for being on the program. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.